Marcus Crawford never imagined that one stormy night in rural Montana would change his life forever. As lightning split the sky above his isolated ranch, he heard something that made his blood run cold, not the thunder, but the desperate pounding on his front door at 2:47 a.m. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the weathered wood of the Crawford ranch house with a fury that seemed almost personal. Marcus had seen plenty of storms in his 63 years, but this one felt different. The kind of storm that seemed to strip away pretenses and reveal truths people would rather keep buried. He'd been unable to sleep, sitting in his worn leather chair by the window, watching the lightning illuminate the vast expanse of his property. The ranch had been in his family for 4 generations, though these days it felt more like a burden than a blessing. Since his wife Sarah had passed 3 years ago, the 800 acres felt impossibly empty. Their son David lived in Seattle now, too busy with his tech company to visit more than twice a year. The pounding came again, more urgent this time. Marcus set down his coffee mug, the one with the faded "World's Greatest Dad" inscription that David had given him 20 years ago, and made his way to the front door. His arthritic knees protested with each step, a constant reminder that his body was betraying him as surely as time itself. Through the peephole, he could barely make out a figure hunched against the doorframe. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, Marcus saw enough to make his hand freeze on the deadbolt. The person outside wasn't just seeking shelter, they were hurt. Badly. Marcus opened the door to find a young man, probably in his late 20s, slumped against the frame. Blood soaked through his torn military fatigues, and his left arm hung at an unnatural angle. But it was his eyes that struck Marcus most. They held the kind of pain that went far deeper than physical wounds. "Please," the soldier gasped, his voice barely audible above the storm. "I am sorry to bother you, sir. My truck broke down about 2 miles back. I just need—" He swayed dangerously, and Marcus caught him before he could fall. "Easy there. Son, let's get you inside." Marcus half carried, half guided the injured man into his living room, settling him carefully onto the couch. In the lamplight, the extent of the soldier's injuries became clear. Besides the obviously broken arm, there was a deep gash across his forehead, and his breathing came in short, painful gasps that suggested possible broken ribs. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, already moving toward the kitchen to gather supplies. "Rodriguez. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez." The words came out in a rush, as if giving his rank and name was an automatic response drilled into him through years of service. Marcus returned with his first aid kit, the comprehensive one Sarah had insisted they keep for ranch emergencies, along with clean towels and a bottle of whiskey. "Well, Sergeant Rodriguez, I'm Marcus Crawford, and you're safe now. But we need to get you to a hospital." Miguel shook his head weakly. "Can't. Please, sir. I need a place to rest for a few hours. I'll be gone by morning, I promise." There was something in the young man's voice, a desperation that went beyond physical pain. Marcus had heard that tone before, in his own voice during the dark months after Sarah's diagnosis. It was the sound of someone running from something they couldn't face. "That arm needs proper medical attention," Marcus said gently, beginning to clean the head wound. "And you might have internal injuries." "I've had worse." Miguel's attempt at a smile was more grimace than anything else. "Fallujah, 2019. Lost 3 good men that day, but walked away with just a concussion and some shrapnel. This is nothing." But Marcus could see it was far from nothing. As he worked to stabilize Miguel's arm with makeshift splints, he noticed the tremor in the young man's hands, not from pain or cold, but from something deeper. The 1,000-yard stare. The way he flinched at unexpected sounds. Marcus had seen enough veterans at the local VFW to recognize the signs. "When's the last time you ate something?" Marcus asked, wrapping the arm splint with practiced efficiency. His years of ranching had taught him basic medical care. You had to be ready for anything. When the nearest hospital was 40 miles away, Miguel had to think about it. Tuesday maybe. What day is it now? Friday night. Or Saturday morning, technically. Marcus studied the young man's gaunt face. You've been on the road for a while. Yeah, since I got out of Walter Reed 2 weeks ago. Miguel's voice carried a bitter edge. Clean bill of health, they said. Ready to rejoin society. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Marcus finished with the bandages and sat back in his chair. What happened out there, son? And I don't mean tonight, I mean what put you on this road in the first place. For a long moment, the only sounds were the storm outside and the steady tick of the grandfather clock Sarah had loved. Miguel stared at his hands, and Marcus could see him wrestling with whether to answer. My unit was ambushed outside Kandahar 18 months ago, Miguel finally said. IED took out our lead vehicle, and we were pinned down for 6 hours. By the time support arrived, 4 of my men were dead. 4 boys who trusted me to bring them home. Marcus waited, sensing there was more. The thing is, I was supposed to be in that lead vehicle. But I'd switched positions with Private Johnson at the last minute, because he was the new guy, and I thought it would be safer for him to be with me in the second truck. Miguel's voice broke. 20 years old, Marcus. Had a baby girl back home he'd never even met. The weight of survivor's guilt settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Marcus recognized it intimately. He'd carried his own version since Sarah's death. All the what-ifs and if-onlys that ate at a man's soul in the quiet hours. The Army gave me a Bronze Star, Miguel continued, his voice hollow, for heroic conduct under enemy fire. They said I saved lives by providing cover while we waited for extraction. But all I can think about is Johnson and Martinez and Williams and Chun, 4 families who got folded flags instead of their sons. Marcus poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering one to Miguel. Guilt's a heavy load to carry alone. Miguel accepted the glass but didn't drink. My wife ... wife now. She tried to understand. But how do you explain to someone that every time you close your eyes, you see your friends dying? That every loud noise makes you hit the deck? That you can't even go to the grocery store without scanning for exits and potential threats? She left 3 months ago. Took our daughter Emma with her. Said she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. Miguel finally took a sip of the whiskey, wincing as it burned. Maybe she was right. Maybe I am just a broken soldier who can't adjust to civilian life. Marcus set down his glass and leaned forward. Can I tell you something, Miguel? 3 years ago, my wife Sarah was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months. She fought for 8, but toward the end ... He paused, the memory still sharp. She was in so much pain, and the morphine wasn't working anymore. She begged me to help her end it peacefully. Miguel looked up, meeting Marcus's eyes for the first time since he'd started talking. I couldn't do it, Marcus continued. I held her hand while she suffered for 2 more weeks because I was too much of a coward to help the woman I loved more than life itself. Every day since, I've wondered if I failed her when she needed me most. That's different, Miguel said quietly. You were trying to protect her. Was I? Or was I protecting myself from having to live with that decision? Marcus shook his head. The point is, we all carry guilt, son. The question is whether we let it bury us or teach us something. A particularly loud thunderclap made Miguel flinch instinctively, his good hand moving toward where his sidearm would have been. Marcus pretended not to notice, giving the young man a moment to collect himself. Where were you heading tonight? Marcus asked. In this storm? Miguel was quiet for so long that Marcus thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Nowhere really, just driving. It's easier than staying still, you know. When you're moving, you can pretend you're going somewhere that matters. Marcus understood. After Sarah died, he'd spent months driving the backroads of Montana, sometimes not coming home for days. Movement felt like progress, even when it was really just running in place. "Well, you're not going anywhere else tonight," Marcus said firmly. "That storm's not letting up, and you need rest. There's a guest room upstairs, Sarah always kept it ready for visitors. I don't want to impose ... You're not imposing. You're accepting help from someone who knows what it's like to feel lost." Marcus stood up, his knees protesting again. "Come on, let's get you settled." As they made their way upstairs, Marcus couldn't help but notice how Miguel moved constantly. Alert, checking corners, positioning himself where he could see both the stairs behind them and the hallway ahead. It was the cautious movement of someone who'd learned that safety was an illusion that could shatter in an instant. The guest room was exactly as Sarah had left it, clean white sheets, a quilt her mother had made, and a small vase that had held fresh flowers until Marcus stopped maintaining that particular ritual. It smelled faintly of lavender, the scent Sarah had loved. "Bathroom's right across the hall," Marcus said. "There are clean towels in the cabinet, and I'll leave some clothes outside the door. We're about the same size, I think." Miguel sat heavily on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking older than his years. "Why are you doing this?" "You don't know." "Me, I could be anyone." Marcus paused in the doorway. "My father always said that sometimes God sends us angels, and sometimes he sends us opportunities to be one ourselves. I'm still figuring out which one you are." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He left Miguel alone and went back downstairs to clean up the first aid supplies. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, but Marcus could hear the young veteran moving around upstairs, restless, unable to settle. He recognized the pattern. Sarah had done the same thing during her worst nights, when the pain was too much but the exhaustion wasn't enough to overcome it. Around 4 in the morning, Marcus dozed off in his chair. He woke to the smell of coffee and bacon cooking in his kitchen. For a moment, he thought maybe Sarah was up early, making breakfast like she used to on Sunday mornings. Then reality reasserted itself, and he made his way to the kitchen, to find Miguel standing at the stove, moving carefully to accommodate his injured arm. "Hope you don't mind," Miguel said without turning around. "Couldn't sleep, and I figured it was the least I could do." Marcus poured himself coffee from the pot Miguel had made. It was stronger than he usually drank, military strong. "How's the arm feeling?" "Then better, then worse. The ribs are what's really bothering me." Miguel flipped the bacon with practiced efficiency. "You know, this is the first time in months I've cooked for someone other than myself. Forgot how different it feels." They ate breakfast in companionable silence, two men who understood that sometimes words weren't necessary. The storm had passed, leaving behind the kind of crystalline morning that made Montana's big sky seem infinite. Through the kitchen window, they could see Marcus's cattle gathering near the water trough, and beyond that, the mountains rose like ancient sentinels against the dawn. "Beautiful country," Miguel observed. "Sarah always said it was God's rough draft for heaven," Marcus replied. "It took me 40 years to appreciate what she saw here, but now I can't imagine living anywhere else." After breakfast, Marcus insisted on driving Miguel to his stranded truck. They found it exactly where Miguel had said, 2 miles down the Violet County Road, pulled into a shallow ditch with steam still rising from under the hood. Marcus took one look at the engine and whistled low. "Blown head gasket, at minimum. Could be worse. I might have thrown a rod." He slammed the hood shut. "This truck's not going anywhere soon." Miguel slumped against the tailgate, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked genuinely defeated. "I don't have money for repairs. Hell, I barely had gas money to get this far. Where were you planning to go?" Marcus asked gently. "I thought maybe California. Heard there were jobs there, places where nobody knows your history." Miguel laughed bitterly. Stupid plan, really. Running away never solved anything. Marcus studied the younger man for a long moment. An idea was forming in his mind. Crazy, probably. But sometimes the best ideas were the ones that seemed impossible at first glance. Miguel, can I ask you something? What did you do before the army? Grew up on a ranch in New Mexico. Worked cattle, fixed fences, did a little of everything. Why? Marcus looked out over his property, 800 acres that had been feeling more like a burden than a blessing. Maybe it was time for a different perspective. I've got a proposition for you, son. And before you say anything, hear me out completely. Marcus leaned against his pickup truck, watching Miguel process what he was about to propose. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Montana landscape, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark song carried on the crisp air. This ranch has been bleeding money for 3 years, Marcus began, his voice steady but thoughtful. Not because the land isn't good, it's some of the best grazing country in the state. But I can't manage it alone anymore, and I've been too stubborn to admit it. Miguel shifted uncomfortably, his injured arm cradled against his chest. Marcus, I appreciate everything you've done, but I'm not looking for charity. Good, because I'm not offering any. Marcus's tone sharpened slightly. What I'm offering is a job. Room, board, and a decent wage in exchange for help running this place, but it comes with conditions. The younger man's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of conditions? First, you see a doctor about those injuries. No arguments. There's a VA clinic in Billings, and Dr. Patricia Henley there specializes in treating veterans. She's a good people, helped a lot of boys from around here. Miguel started to protest, but Marcus held up a hand. Second, you stick around for at least 6 months. None of this disappearing in the middle of the night nonsense. If you're going to help me save this ranch, I need to know you're committed. And third? Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying the horizon. Third, you let me teach you what Sarah taught me about dealing with loss. Not therapy, I'm not qualified for that, but practical stuff. Ways to make the pain useful instead of just destructive. Miguel kicked at a loose stone with his boot. I don't know, Marcus. What if I can't handle it? What if I have an episode or something? Then we deal with it. Together. Marcus opened the truck door. But right now, let's focus on getting your belongings and figuring out how to get that truck back to the ranch. Over the next hour, they managed to extract Miguel's few possessions from the disabled vehicle: a worn duffel bag, a small cooler with spoiled food, and a metal lockbox that Miguel handled with particular care. Marcus didn't ask what was inside, sensing it contained things too personal to discuss with someone he'd known for less than 12 hours. Back at the ranch, Marcus showed Miguel around the property with new eyes. Instead of seeing the overwhelming scope of work that needed doing, he found himself explaining the potential, the possibilities that had been dormant for too long. We're running about 200 head of cattle right now, Marcus explained as they walked through the main barn. Property could support twice that, easy, but I've been letting sections go fallow because I couldn't keep up with the maintenance. Miguel examined the barn structure with a practiced eye, running his good hand along support beams and checking the integrity of the roof. This is solid construction. When was it built? My grandfather put it up in 1947, right after he came back from the war. Used timber from his own land and granite from the quarry up north. Marcus felt a familiar pride in his voice. He always said a man should build things to outlast himself. He was right. I've seen a lot of newer construction that couldn't hold up to what this barn's been through. Miguel paused at a stall where Marcus kept his aging workhorse, a gentle giant named Thunder. Beautiful animal. Quarter horse? Part quarter, part draft. Thunder's 22 now, which makes him practically ancient in horse years, but he's still got good days. Marcus stroked the horse's neck affectionately. Sarah used to say he had an old soul, like he understood more than he let on. They continued The tour, walking fence lines that needed repair and checking water systems that hadn't been properly maintained in months. Miguel asked intelligent questions and offered observations that showed his ranching experience, but Marcus noticed how the young veteran constantly scanned their surroundings, his body language tense despite the peaceful setting. Combat reflexes. "Don't just turn off," Miguel said, noticing Marcus's attention. "Part of me is always looking for threats, escape routes, high ground. Makes it hard to relax. Does it help to stay busy?" "Sometimes. But sometimes it makes it worse, because when your hands are occupied, but your mind isn't, that's when the memories sneak up on you." Miguel stopped at a section of fence that had been damaged by falling tree branches. "This is fixable, though. Probably take a day or two to do it right." "We're not in any hurry," Marcus assured him. "One thing I've learned since Sarah passed is that good work takes the time it takes. Rushing just leads to mistakes you have to fix later." That afternoon, they drove into town to pick up supplies and, despite Miguel's protests, to visit Dr. Henley at the VA clinic. The town of Cedar Falls wasn't much to look at: a main street with a dozen businesses, a small school, and the kind of community where everyone knew everyone else's business. But it had a solid, enduring quality that spoke to generations of people who'd chosen to stay and make something worthwhile. Dr. Henley turned out to be a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and the no-nonsense manner of someone who'd seen enough to cut through pretense quickly. She examined Miguel's injuries with gentle efficiency while Marcus waited in the outer office, thumbing through magazines and listening to the murmur of voices through the thin walls. "Your friend is lucky," Dr. Henley told Marcus when they emerged an hour later. "The arm's a clean break that should heal well with proper rest. The ribs are bruised but not broken. It's the other stuff I'm more concerned about." Miguel had gone ahead to the truck, giving them privacy to talk. "PTSD?" Marcus asked. "Among other things. He's severely undernourished, hasn't been sleeping properly in weeks, and he's showing classic signs of hypervigilance and anxiety. But he's also remarkably forthcoming about his symptoms, which is a good sign. Many veterans won't even admit there's a problem." Dr. Henley handed Marcus a card. "I gave him my direct number and the crisis hotline, but honestly, the best thing for him right now is exactly what you're providing: purpose, stability, and someone who gives a damn. Just don't try to be his therapist. Be his friend and employer, and let the professionals handle the clinical stuff." On the drive back to the ranch, Miguel was unusually quiet. Finally, as they turned onto the long gravel drive, he spoke up. "She wants me to start seeing a counselor. Says there are new treatments that actually work for PTSD. What do you think about that?" Miguel was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I'm scared. What if talking about it makes it worse? What if I find out I'm more broken than I thought?" Marcus pulled up in front of the house and killed the engine. "Miguel, can I tell you about the worst day of my life?" The younger man nodded. "It was about 6 months after Sarah's diagnosis. She'd been responding well to treatment, and we were cautiously optimistic. Then she collapsed in the kitchen while making breakfast, and when I got her to the hospital, the doctors told us the cancer had spread to her liver and brain." Marcus stared out at the mountains, remembering. "That night, I sat in the hospital parking lot for 3 hours, too angry and scared to go back inside. I kept thinking that if I didn't go back in, if I didn't hear the details, maybe it wouldn't be real. But you went back. Eventually, yeah. Because Sarah was in there alone, and she needed me to be strong for her. But the fear never went away. I was just as terrified on her last day as I was on that first bad day. The difference was that I'd learned to be afraid and still do what needed doing." Miguel considered this. "You think that's what courage is? Being scared but doing it anyway?" "I think courage is a lot of different things to different people. But for me, it's choosing to face tomorrow even when today feels impossible." That evening, they worked together to repair the damaged fence section. Miguel insisted on helping despite his injuries, and Marcus found himself appreciating not just the extra hands, but the companionship. It had been too long since he'd shared. The satisfaction of a job well done with someone who understood the value of honest work. "This reminds me of working with my dad," Miguel said as they stretched new wire between posts. "He used to say that ranch work was like meditation, repetitive enough to quiet your mind, but demanding enough to keep you present. Smart man. What happened to him?" "Heart attack when I was 19. Mom couldn't handle the ranch alone, so we sold it and she moved to town. That's when I enlisted, figured the army would give me structure and purpose while I figured out what came next." Miguel's laugh was rueful. "Funny how life never works out the way you plan. Sarah used to say that life is what happens while happens. Sarah used to say that life is what happens. You're making other plans." She was always better at rolling with the punches than I was. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they finished the repair work and headed back to the house. Marcus noticed that Miguel seemed more relaxed than he had all day, his movements less guarded, his scanning of the environment less compulsive. "You know what I miss most about ranch life?" Miguel asked as they put away their tools. "The rhythm of it. City life, military life, it's all about reacting to external demands. But ranch life has its own pace, dictated by seasons and weather and the needs of the animals. There's something peaceful about that." Sarah always said ranching was really about partnership with the land, with the animals, with the weather. You work with what nature gives you instead of trying to impose your will on it. They shared a simple dinner of grilled steaks and vegetables from Marcus's garden, talking about practical matters, which sections of fence needed the most attention, how to optimize the cattle's grazing patterns, whether it made sense to plant winter hay in the unused southern pasture. But beneath the mundane conversation, Marcus sensed something shifting in Miguel. The young veteran was beginning to see possibilities instead of just problems, to think about the future instead of being trapped in the past. After dinner, Miguel excused himself to call Dr. Henley's office and schedule an appointment with the counselor she'd recommended. Marcus gave him privacy for the conversation, stepping out onto the front porch to watch the stars emerge in the clear Montana sky. When Miguel joined him 20 minutes later, he looked simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. "Appointments set for Thursday morning," he reported. "Dr. Matthews, she specializes in combat trauma. Dr. Henley says she's helped a lot of veterans find their way back." "How do you feel about it?" Miguel was quiet for a long moment. "Terrified, but also hopeful, I guess. For the first time in months, I can imagine a version of my life that doesn't revolve around guilt and nightmares." They sat in comfortable silence, two men who'd found an unexpected connection in their shared experience of loss and the possibility of healing. In the distance, an owl called to its mate, and somewhere in the darkness, the cattle settled in for the night. "Marcus?" Miguel's voice was soft in the darkness. "Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down soldier you didn't know from Adam." Marcus considered his response carefully. "Miguel, I don't think you're broken. I think you're wounded, and there's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed, but wounded things can heal, given time and the right conditions." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Because if I don't believe it about you, I can't believe it about myself either." The next morning brought the kind of crystal-clear autumn day that made Montana famous. Miguel woke early and was already feeding the cattle when Marcus emerged from the house with coffee for both of them. "Sleep any better?" Marcus asked. "Some. Had the nightmare again, but it was different this time. Instead of ending with the explosion, I dreamed about Johnson's little girl, Emma, like my daughter. But in the dream, she was grown up and happy, and she thanked me for trying to save her daddy." Marcus handed him the steaming mug. "Dreams change as we heal. Maybe your subconscious is starting to process things differently. Maybe." Miguel sipped. his coffee gratefully. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about partnership. What if we expanded that idea?" "How do you mean?" Miguel gestured toward the unused sections of the property. "What if we didn't just restore this ranch to what it was, but made it something new? Something that could help other veterans like me?" Marcus felt a spark of interest. "Go on." "Well, there's a program I heard about in Colorado, a working ranch, that employs veterans dealing with PTSD and other issues. Gives them meaningful work, structure, and a community of people who understand what they're going through." Miguel's voice gained enthusiasm as he spoke. "We could do something similar here. Not huge, maybe 4 or 5 guys at a time, but enough to make a real difference." The idea hit Marcus like a revelation. Here was a way to honor Sarah's memory while giving his ranch new purpose, and potentially helping other young people find their way back from the darkness. That's brilliant, Miguel. But it would be a massive undertaking. We'd need additional housing, insurance, probably some kind of non-profit status. "I know it's a big dream," Miguel said quickly. "Maybe too big." "I just thought." "No, it's not too big. It's exactly the right size." Marcus felt excitement building in his chest for the first time in years. Sarah always said this place was meant to be more than just a cattle ranch. Maybe this is what she was talking about. They spent the rest of the morning walking the property with new eyes, not just seeing what needed to be repaired, but envisioning what could be built. The old bunkhouse that had housed seasonal workers in Marcus's grandfather's day could be renovated. The unused barn could be converted into workshop space. The southern pasture was perfectly positioned for a therapeutic riding program. "We'd need professional help," Marcus mused as they examined the structural integrity of the bunkhouse. "Social workers, therapists, maybe a program coordinator. Dr. Henley might know people. And there are grants available for veteran support." "Programs." Miguel's eyes were bright with possibility. "This could really work, Marcus. This could help a lot of people." For the first time since Sarah's death, Marcus felt like he was moving toward something instead of just away from his grief. And for the first time since Kandahar, Miguel was talking about the future with hope instead of fear. Neither of them could have imagined that this conversation would set in motion events that would transform not just their lives, but the lives of dozens of veterans who would find their way to the Crawford Ranch in the years to come. And neither could have predicted that Miguel's gratitude for Marcus's kindness would eventually manifest in ways that would astonish them both. The weeks that followed Miguel's first therapy session marked a turning point neither man had anticipated. Dr. Sarah Matthews turned out to be exactly what Miguel needed, a former Army medic who understood military culture but refused to let him hide behind his service record. She pushed him to confront his survivor's guilt while teaching him practical techniques for managing his symptoms. Meanwhile, their ranch restoration project had evolved into something much more ambitious. Marcus had contacted his lawyer, Janet Reeves, about the legal requirements for establishing a non-profit organization. She'd been Sarah's college roommate and had watched the ranch deteriorate after her friend's death with growing concern. "Marcus, this is either the best idea you've ever had or the craziest," Janet said during their meeting in her Cedar Falls office. "Probably both. But if you're serious about this, we need to start with a solid business plan." Miguel had thrown himself into research with the same intensity he'd once applied to military planning. He'd reached out to similar programs across the country, studying their structures, funding models, and success rates. The dining room table at the ranch house was covered with printouts, legal documents, and hand-drawn sketches of proposed renovations. "Look at this," Miguel said one evening, spreading out a thick folder of materials. The Heroes Ranch in Texas started with just 2 veterans and 1 rancher. Now they're serving 40 people annually and have a 90% success rate for participants completing the program. Marcus studied the documents over his reading glasses. What's their definition of success? Stable housing, employment, and significant reduction in PTSD symptoms after 6 months. Miguel pointed to a graph. But what's really impressive is their long-term outcomes. 80% of graduates are still thriving 2 years later. That's remarkable. Marcus set down the papers and looked at Miguel. How are you feeling about your own progress? It had become their evening ritual, checking in with each other about more than just ranch business. Miguel's nightmares had decreased in frequency, though they hadn't disappeared entirely. His hypervigilance was still noticeable, but less consuming. And he'd started talking about his fallen comrades without the crushing weight of guilt that had initially made speech impossible. Better, not great, but better. Miguel rubbed his temples. Dr. Matthews says trauma recovery isn't linear. Some days I feel like I'm making real progress, and then something small, a car backfiring, a helicopter overhead, can send me right back to square one. But you're not staying at square one as long as you used to. No, that's true. And having a purpose beyond just surviving helps enormously. Miguel gestured at their planning materials. This project makes me feel like my experience might actually be useful for something positive. Their first major breakthrough came when Dr. Henley introduced them to Captain Rebecca Thompson, a recently retired Army officer who specialized in veteran transition programs. She drove out to the ranch on a crisp November morning, and Marcus could see immediately that she was someone who got things done. "Gentlemen, I've heard about your vision, and I'm intrigued," Captain Thompson said, as they toured the property. "But before we talk about implementation, I need to understand your motivation. Programs like this succeed or fail based on the commitment and understanding of the founders." She spent 3 hours interviewing both Marcus and Miguel separately, asking pointed questions about their expectations, their understanding of trauma, and their willingness to deal with the inevitable challenges that would arise. "Miguel's story isn't unique," she told Marcus during her individual interview. "What's unique is finding a civilian willing to take a genuine risk to help someone they barely knew. That suggests the kind of character we need for this to work." With Miguel, her questions were more direct. "Why do you want to help other veterans instead of just focusing on your own recovery?" Miguel had clearly given this considerable thought. "Because isolation makes everything worse. I spent months driving around the country, completely cut off from anyone who understood what I was going through. When Marcus took me in, it wasn't just the shelter and food, it was being seen as a person with value instead of just a problem. To be managed." Captain Thompson nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the insight we need. Too many programs treat veterans like broken machines that need fixing instead of human beings who need community and purpose." Her final recommendation was unequivocal. Move forward, but start small. Prove the concept with 2 or 3 participants before you think about expansion. The next challenge was funding. Marcus had some savings and could contribute the land, but the renovation costs alone would run into the hundreds of thousands. Miguel had discovered that grants for veteran programs were available but highly competitive and required extensive documentation. "We need a compelling story," explained David Martinez, a grant writer Janet had recommended. "Funders want to see clear outcomes, professional management, and evidence that you understand the complexities of what you're attempting." This was where Miguel's military background proved invaluable. He approached grant applications with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to mission planning, creating detailed timelines, budget projections, and risk assessments. The Veterans Affairs Community Partnership Grant could provide up to $300,000 for the first 2 years, Miguel reported after a particularly intensive research session. But they want a comprehensive program outline, including staffing plans, participant selection criteria, and measurable success metrics. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the complexity, but Miguel's enthusiasm was infectious. Watching the young veteran channel his intelligence and training into something constructive had been one of the most rewarding aspects of their partnership. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow and forcing them to focus on planning rather than physical work. Miguel's truck had been repaired. Marcus had quietly covered the costs without mentioning it, but the young veteran showed no signs of wanting to leave. "I keep thinking I should feel trapped here," Miguel confided one evening as they worked on grant applications. 6 months ago, the idea of staying in one place for more than a few days made me panic. But this feels different. How so? It feels like I'm building something instead of just surviving. And having you to bounce ideas off of makes the work feel collaborative instead of isolating. Their grant application to the VA was submitted in December, with notification promised by March. In the meantime, they continued developing their program model with input from Dr. Matthews, Captain Thompson, and several other professionals who'd agreed to serve on their advisory board. The proposed Crawford Ranch Veterans Program would accommodate 4 participants at a time for 6-month residential stays. Each veteran would receive individual therapy, participate in ranch work, and contribute to group activities designed to build community and mutual support. The program would include vocational training, financial counseling, and assistance with transitioning to independent living. What sets this apart from existing programs? Marcus asked during one of their planning sessions. Miguel had given this considerable thought. Most programs are either purely therapeutic or purely vocational. We're proposing something holistic. Therapy happens alongside meaningful work, and the work itself becomes part of the healing process. And the ranch setting? There's something about working with animals and land that puts things in perspective. When you're fixing a fence or feeding cattle, you're focused on immediate, concrete tasks. It's meditative, but also productive. And the isolation that feels suffocating in a city becomes peaceful out here. As winter deepened, their daily routine evolved into something comfortable and productive. Miguel had fully recovered from his physical injuries and had proven himself invaluable in maintaining the ranch operations. But more importantly, he'd become the friend Marcus hadn't realized he desperately needed. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said one evening as they sat by the fireplace, reviewing architectural plans for the bunkhouse renovation. "When you showed up that night, I thought I was helping you. But I think you've helped me more than I've helped you." Miguel looked up from the blueprints. "How do you figure?" "This ranch has been my whole life, but after Sarah died, I'd lost sight of why it mattered. You reminded me that places like this can be more than just businesses. They can be sanctuaries." "I think we helped each other," Miguel said quietly. "But the real test is going to be whether we can create that sanctuary for other people." In February, they received their first piece of encouraging news. The Montana Veterans Affairs Office had agreed to provide a $50,000 planning grant to support their program development. It wasn't enough to fund operations, but it was enough to begin renovations and hire a part-time program coordinator. "This is really happening," Miguel said, staring at the approval letter. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in my truck and planning to drive until I ran out of gas. Now we're actually going to help other veterans find their way back." "Don't get ahead of yourself," Marcus cautioned, though he was equally excited. "We still need the major funding, and we need to prove we can actually do what we're promising." But privately, Marcus was amazed by the transformation in both of them. Miguel had evolved from a broken, desperate young man into a focused, purposeful leader. And Marcus himself felt more energized and hopeful than he had since Sarah's diagnosis. The major funding decision came in March, delivered by a phone call that changed everything. Miguel answered, and Marcus watched his face cycle through disbelief, joy, and something approaching shock. "We got it," Miguel said after hanging up. "The full $300,000. The VA Review Committee called our proposal innovative and promising and approved funding for the complete 2-year pilot program." Marcus felt his knees go weak. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. We start receiving funds Next month, which means we can begin renovations immediately and open for our first participants by September. They celebrated that night with a bottle of wine Sarah had been saving for a special occasion, one Marcus had never been able to bring himself to open. As they toasted their success, Marcus felt her presence in a way he hadn't since her death, as if she was finally able to rest, knowing the ranch would serve a purpose worthy of her memory. "What's the first thing we need to do?" Marcus asked. Miguel consulted his ever-present notebook. "Hire contractors for the bunkhouse renovation, order materials for the workshop conversion, and start recruiting our first participants, Captain. Thompson has already identified several candidates who might be good fits. And you? Are you ready for this responsibility?" Miguel was quiet for a moment, considering. 6 months ago, I would have said no. I was barely keeping myself together, let alone capable of helping anyone else. But working with you, seeing how much difference one person's compassion can make, yeah, I think I'm ready. What about your own treatment, Dr. Matthews? She's going to continue working with me, and she's also agreed to provide clinical oversight for the program participants. She thinks being in a leadership role might actually accelerate my own healing, as long as I don't lose sight of my own needs in the process. Spring brought a flurry of activity to the ranch. Contractors arrived to renovate the bunkhouse, installing individual rooms with private bathrooms, a common kitchen, and a meeting space for group therapy sessions. The old barn was converted into a workshop with areas for woodworking, metalworking, and equipment repair. Miguel proved to have a talent for project management, coordinating the various contractors and ensuring the work stayed on schedule and budget. Marcus handled the business side, working with Janet to establish the nonprofit corporation and with their accountant to set up proper financial systems. "You know what I've learned about you over these past few months?" Marcus said one evening, as they surveyed the renovated bunkhouse. "What's that?" "You're a natural leader. I bet your soldiers would have followed you anywhere." Miguel's expression darkened slightly. "The ones who had the chance to, anyway." "Miguel, you've got to stop defining yourself by the people you couldn't save and start recognizing your responsibility to the people you can save, including yourself." It was a conversation they'd had variations of many times, but Miguel seemed to hear it differently this time. Dr. Matthews says something similar, that survivor's guilt can become a form of self-indulgence if it prevents you from using your experience to help others. Smart woman. Yeah, she is. And she's excited about what we're building here. Says it could become a model for programs across the country if we get it right. Their first 3 participants were scheduled to arrive in early September. Tommy Rodriguez, a Navy veteran dealing with depression and substance abuse. Jennifer Walsh, an Air Force mechanic struggling with military sexual trauma. And Robert Kim, a Marine who'd lost a leg to an IED and was having difficulty adjusting to civilian life with his prosthetic. "Diverse group," Captain Thompson observed during a pre-arrival planning meeting. "Which is good. You'll learn quickly whether your program model works for different types of trauma and different personalities. Are we ready?" Marcus asked, looking around the room at Miguel, Dr. Matthews, Captain Thompson, and their newly hired program coordinator, Lisa Chun. "As ready as we can be without actually doing it," Miguel replied. "But I think that's the point. Some things you can only learn by experience." Marcus nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. In just a few weeks, the ranch would be transformed from a quiet refuge for 2 healing men into something much more ambitious and uncertain. But as he looked at Miguel, confident, purposeful, focused on helping others rather than drowning in his own pain, Marcus felt certain they were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The scared, broken soldier who'd collapsed on his doorstep 8 months ago had become someone capable of leading others through their own darkness. And Marcus himself had discovered that Sarah's death, devastating as it had been, didn't have to be the end of his story. Sometimes the most meaningful chapters began when you thought everything worth doing was already finished. September arrived with the crisp promise of autumn, and with it came the three veterans who would test everything Marcus and Miguel had built over the past year. The morning of their arrival, Miguel stood in the renovated bunkhouse, checking each room one final time. His hands were steady, but Marcus could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes. "Second thoughts?" Marcus asked, joining him in the common area. "Not second thoughts exactly, more like acute awareness of how much we don't know." Miguel straightened a crooked picture frame, a landscape Sarah had painted years ago. "What if we're not qualified for this? What if we make things worse instead of better?" Marcus had been wrestling with the same doubts. "Lisa's here for a reason. Dr. Matthews is here for a reason. We're not doing this alone." Lisa Chun, their program coordinator, was a former social worker who'd specialized in veteran services for 15 years. She'd arrived the week before to finalize intake procedures and coordinate with local support services. Her calm competence had been reassuring, but Marcus knew that no amount of preparation could predict how real people with real trauma would respond to their carefully constructed program. Tommy Rodriguez arrived first. Dropped off by his sister in a battered Honda Civic, he was smaller than Miguel had expected, maybe 5'6" and thin, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested too much caffeine and not enough sleep. His handshake was firm, but his eyes never quite met theirs directly. "Navy?" Miguel asked, noting the anchor tattoo on Tommy's forearm. "Sonar Tech, USS Michigan, 3 deployments." Tommy's voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken much recently. "Thanks for, taking a chance on me." "We're all taking chances here," Marcus replied. "That's kind of the point." Jennifer Walsh arrived an hour later in a rental car, her posture military straight despite being in civilian clothes. She was the only woman in their first cohort, a fact that had required additional planning for privacy and safety considerations. Dr. Matthews had been particularly helpful in preparing for the unique challenges faced by female veterans. "Ma'am," Jennifer said, addressing Lisa with crisp formality before catching herself. "Sorry, old habits." "No apology necessary," Lisa smiled. "Military courtesy is never a bad thing. But you can call me Lisa." Jennifer nodded, scanning the common area with the same tactical awareness Miguel had displayed during his first weeks at the ranch. "This is nice, really nice. Not what I expected from a ranch in Montana." Robert Kim was the last to arrive, driving a modified pickup truck that accommodated his prosthetic leg. He moved with the deliberate precision of someone who'd had to relearn basic tasks, but there was no self-pity in his manner, just focused determination. "Hell of a view," he said, taking in the mountain vista visible through the common rooms. "Large windows. Beats the hell out of my studio apartment in Phoenix." That first evening, they gathered for dinner in the main house, a tradition Marcus and Miguel had decided would help build community. The conversation was stilted initially, the careful politeness of strangers trying to navigate uncertain social territory. "So how does this work exactly?" Tommy asked, pushing food around his plate without eating much. "I mean, what's a typical day look like?" Miguel had prepared for this question. Morning chores start at 6, feeding animals, basic maintenance tasks. Breakfast at 7:30, then either individual work projects or group activities depending on the day. Lunch at noon, more work in the afternoon, dinner at 6. Evening time is yours. We've got a library, workshop access, hiking trails, if you're interested. What about therapy? Jennifer's question was direct, cutting through the casual conversation. Individual sessions with Dr. Matthews twice weekly, Lisa answered. Group sessions every Thursday evening. And informal counseling support available anytime through Miguel or myself. Robert leaned back in his chair. "Miguel, can I ask you something? What's your story? I mean, why are you here instead of at some VA facility getting your own help?" It was the question Marcus had been expecting, and he watched Miguel carefully to see how he'd handle it. Over the past year, Miguel had become increasingly comfortable discussing his experience. But this was different. This was leadership, being vulnerable in front of people who needed him to be strong. "I was where you are about 14 months ago," Miguel said simply. "Broken down on a road outside of town, sleeping in my truck, no idea where I was going or why. Marcus took me in when he had no reason to trust me, and working this ranch helped me remember who I was underneath all the trauma and guilt. And now you think you can help us find the same thing." Tommy's tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't entirely friendly either. "I think we can help each other find it," Miguel corrected. "I'm not your therapist or your commanding officer. I'm just someone who's been where you are and found a way forward. Whether this place works for you depends on what you put into it." The honesty seemed to break some of the tension in the room. Jennifer asked about the workshop facilities. Robert wanted to know about the hiking trails, and Tommy inquired about internet access for staying in touch with his family. After dinner, Marcus found Miguel on the front porch, staring out at the stars. "How do you think it went?" Marcus asked. "Better than I expected, honestly. They're all guarded, but that's normal. What I'm watching for is whether they start to engage with the work or just go through the motions. And if they just go through the motions," Miguel was quiet for a moment, "then we learn from it and do better with the next group. But I don't think that's going to happen. Did you see how Jennifer looked at the workshop? And Robert's already talking about the trails. They want this to work." The first weeks were an exercise in patience for everyone involved. Each veteran brought their own challenges and coping mechanisms. Tommy struggled with insomnia and had difficulty concentrating on tasks for more than an hour at a time. Jennifer threw herself into work with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, as if staying busy could keep her demons at bay. Robert approached everything methodically, adapting tasks to accommodate his prosthetic, but never asking for special consideration. Miguel proved to be a natural mentor, somehow knowing when to push and when to give space. He worked alongside each veteran, sharing skills and stories without being preachy or condescending. Marcus watched him evolve into the leader he'd suspected was hiding beneath the trauma. "You know what's interesting?" Dr. Matthews observed during a staff meeting 3 weeks into the program. "Miguel's own healing has accelerated since he started working with the others. There's something powerful about being needed, about having your experience matter to someone else's recovery." "Is that sustainable?" Lisa asked. "I'm concerned about burnout or secondary trauma. It's something we need to monitor carefully." Dr. Matthews agreed. But so far, Miguel seems to be drawing energy from the work rather than being depleted by it. The key is making sure he maintains his own therapy and doesn't lose sight of his own needs. The breakthrough moment came during the 4th week, during what started as a routine fence repair project. Robert was struggling with a post-hole digger, his prosthetic making it difficult to maintain leverage, and his frustration was building visibly. "Here, let me show you a different technique," Miguel offered, demonstrating a modified stance that would work better with Robert's prosthetic. "I don't need special treatment," Robert snapped, his patience finally breaking. "I can figure this out myself." "I know you can," Miguel replied calmly. "But why make it harder than it has to be? The goal is to get the job done, not to prove. You can do it exactly the same way you did before you were injured." The comment hit home, and Robert's anger deflated. "It's just ... I hate feeling like I need help with everything." "You think I don't know that feeling?" Miguel set down his tools and sat on a nearby fence rail. "For months after I got back from Afghanistan, I couldn't even go to the grocery store without having a panic attack. But I was so determined to prove I was fine that I refused help from anyone." Jennifer and Tommy had stopped their own work to listen, sensing this was important. "What changed?" Robert asked. "Marcus showed me that accepting help isn't the same as admitting defeat. Sometimes it's just recognizing that there are better ways to do things, and that other people's experience can save you time and frustration. Tommy spoke up unexpectedly. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Before the Navy, I used to fix cars with my dad. Never thought twice about asking him to hand me a wrench or show me a technique I didn't know. But now, asking for help feels like admitting I'm broken. Maybe the problem is how we define broken, Jennifer said quietly. It was the first time she'd volunteered anything personal. I keep thinking I should be able to just get over what happened to me, like it was a temporary setback instead of something that changed who I am, Miguel nodded. Dr. Matthews told me something that stuck with me. She said trauma doesn't break us, it changes us. And sometimes the change includes new strengths we didn't have before. Like what? Robert was genuinely curious. Like understanding what real courage looks like. Like knowing the difference between important problems and trivial ones. Like being able to recognize when someone else is struggling, even when they're trying to hide it. The conversation continued for another hour, the fence repair forgotten as the four veterans shared experiences and insights in a way that felt natural rather than forced. Marcus, watching from the barn, felt a surge of pride in what Miguel had accomplished. This was exactly what they'd envisioned, authentic connection between people who understood each other's struggles. That evening's group therapy session with Dr. Matthews was notably different. Instead of the guarded politeness that had characterized earlier sessions, the veterans engaged openly with each other and with the therapeutic process. I'm seeing something I haven't seen before in group settings, Dr. Matthews told Marcus and Miguel afterward. Usually, it takes months for veterans to develop this level of trust and mutual support. The combination of meaningful work and peer leadership seems to be accelerating the process. Is that good or bad? Marcus asked. Very good, as long as we don't rush things. The foundation they're building with each other is solid, which means they're more likely to continue supporting each other after they leave the program. As October progressed, the daily rhythm of ranch life began to transform all four veterans in visible ways. Tommy's insomnia improved as physical exhaustion from outdoor work helped regulate his sleep cycle. Jennifer started taking on leadership roles in group projects, her natural organizational skills emerging as her confidence grew. Robert discovered a talent for working with the horses, his patience and methodical approach perfectly suited to building trust with the animals. But it was the small moments that mattered most. Tommy laughing at Robert's dry humor during morning chores, Jennifer teaching the others how to properly maintain their tools. All four veterans working together to solve problems without being directed by Miguel or the staff. They're becoming a team, Miguel observed one evening as they watched the veterans work together to repair a water pump that had broken down during the day. They're becoming friends, Marcus corrected, which is even better. The real test came in November when Tommy received word that his ex-wife was seeking to modify their custody arrangement, claiming his PTSD made him an unfit father. The news sent him into a spiral of anger and despair that threatened to derail his progress. She's probably right, Tommy said during an emergency session with Dr. Matthews. What kind of father wakes up screaming from nightmares? What if I have an episode around my kids? Instead of offering platitudes, Miguel shared his own fears about his daughter Emma. I haven't seen my little girl in over a year because I was afraid of exactly the same thing. But Dr. Matthews helped me understand that being afraid of hurting someone you love isn't the same as actually being dangerous to them. How do you know the difference? Tommy asked. By doing the work. By being honest about your symptoms and learning to manage them. By building a support system that can help you when things get difficult. Miguel paused. And by recognizing that your kids need their father, the real you, not some pretend version that has to be perfect. Robert and Jennifer rallied around Tommy in ways that surprised even Dr. Matthews. They helped him prepare for his custody hearing, researching his legal rights and practicing his testimony. More importantly, they held him accountable for continuing his therapy and ranch work, even when depression made him want to give up. "This is what I hoped would happen," Dr. Matthews told the staff during their weekly meeting. "They're not just healing individually, they're learning to be part of a community that supports each other through difficult times." The custody hearing in December was tense, but Tommy's progress was undeniable. His ex-wife's lawyer struggled to argue that a man who was employed in therapy and demonstrating clear improvements in his mental health posed a danger to his children. The judge ultimately maintained the existing custody arrangement, with the provision that Tommy continue his treatment. "We did it," Tommy said when he returned to the ranch with the good news. "I mean, you guys did it. I never could have gotten through that alone." "Yes, you could have," Miguel replied. "But you didn't have to. That's the difference." As their 6-month program neared its end, all 3 veterans had made remarkable progress. Tommy had reconnected with his children and was making plans to move closer to them after completing the program. Jennifer had been accepted into a computer programming boot camp and was preparing to start a new career. Robert had been offered a job with a therapeutic writing program in Colorado, combining his newfound skills with horses with his desire to help other disabled veterans. "What happens to us after we leave?" Jennifer asked during one of their final group sessions. "You stay connected," Miguel said simply. "This isn't the end of your relationship with each other or with this place. It's the beginning of the next chapter." Marcus felt a profound sense of satisfaction as he watched the 3 veterans prepare to leave the ranch. They were different people than the scared, broken individuals who'd arrived 6 months earlier, not because their trauma had been erased, but because they'd learned to carry it without being crushed by it. And Miguel had transformed as well. From a desperate young man seeking refuge into a confident leader capable of guiding others through their darkest moments. The scared soldier who'd collapsed on Marcus's doorstep had become someone who could light the way for others lost in the same darkness. But neither Marcus nor Miguel could have predicted what would happen next, how their small program would attract the attention of people with the power to transform their vision into something far greater than either had imagined possible. The success of their first cohort brought unexpected attention to the Crawford Ranch Veterans Program. What Marcus and Miguel had assumed would be a quiet, local initiative suddenly found itself in the spotlight when Jennifer Walsh's story was featured in a Montana Veterans magazine. The article, titled "From Trauma to Triumph: A New Model for Veteran Recovery," included photos of the ranch and detailed interviews with all 3 graduates. 17 phone calls yesterday, Lisa Chun reported during their January staff meeting, and 43 emails from veterans asking about the program, family members wanting information, and other ranchers inquiring about starting similar programs. Miguel looked overwhelmed by the response. "We're only equipped for 4 people at a time. How do we even begin to handle this kind of interest?" "Carefully," Dr. Matthews advised. "Success like this can be dangerous if it grows too fast. We need to maintain quality while figuring out how to scale responsibly." But the attention had caught the notice of people with considerably more resources than Marcus and Miguel had imagined possible. 3 weeks after the article appeared, they received a call that would change everything. "Mr. Crawford, this is Amanda Foster from the Bradley Foundation in Denver. We're a private foundation that funds innovative veteran support programs, and we've been following your work with great interest." Marcus gestured frantically for Miguel to pick up the extension. "Thank you for calling, Miss Foster. What can we do for you?" "Actually, it's what we might be able to do for you. Our board has reviewed your program model, and we'd like to discuss a significant expansion grant. Would you be available for a site visit next week?" After hanging up, Marcus and Miguel stared at each other in stunned silence. "The Bradley Foundation," Miguel said slowly. "Do you know who they are? Should I?" Miguel was already pulling up their website on his laptop. They gave $12 million to veteran programs last year. $12 million, Marcus. They don't make small grants. The site visit was unlike anything they'd experienced. Amanda Foster arrived with a team of 3 associates, conducting a thorough evaluation that included interviews with staff, reviews of financial records, and detailed discussions about their long-term vision. Amanda herself was a former Army colonel with an MBA from Wharton, and her questions were both insightful and challenging. "What's your capacity for replication?" she asked Miguel during a private interview. "If we provided significant funding, could your model be adapted to other locations with different populations and geographic challenges?" "I think so, but it would require careful attention to local conditions and community resources," Miguel replied. "The core principles, meaningful work, peer support, professional therapy, and gradual reintegration should translate anywhere, but the specific implementation would need to be customized." "And you personally, are you prepared for the leadership role this kind of expansion would require?" "We're not just talking about running one program anymore. We're talking about potentially training other program directors, developing standardized curricula, and ensuring quality control across multiple sites." The question hit Miguel at a fundamental level. 2 years ago, he'd been sleeping in his truck, barely functional. Now he was being asked to consider leading a national initiative. 2 years ago, I would have said absolutely not, he answered honestly. But working here, seeing what's possible when people are given genuine opportunities for recovery. Yes, I think I'm ready, or at least I'm ready to try. The Bradley Foundation's proposal, when it came, was staggering in scope. They offered a 3-year, $2.8 million grant to establish the Crawford Ranch as a flagship program and training center, with additional funding to help establish 5 satellite programs in other states. "We want you to become the model for ranch-based veteran recovery programs nationwide," Amanda explained during a conference call with the full team. "Your first cohort success rates are remarkable, but more importantly, your approach addresses gaps that traditional programs haven't been able to fill." The catch, if it could be called that, was the expectation of rapid but controlled growth. The Bradley Foundation wanted them to expand their capacity to 16 participants within 2 years, while simultaneously developing training materials and supporting the establishment of programs in Texas, Colorado, North Carolina, California, and Wisconsin. "It's an incredible opportunity," Lisa said during their emergency planning session, "but it's also terrifying. We're talking about fundamentally changing what we are." Marcus felt torn between excitement and apprehension. "Miguel, this is your call more than anyone's. Are you ready for this?" Miguel walked to the window overlooking the ranch where their second cohort was working. 4 more veterans who'd arrived in January, each bringing their own challenges and possibilities. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Miguel said finally. "All the veterans like me who are driving around the country right now, lost and broken, with no idea that places like this exist. If we can create more programs like this one, maybe some of them won't have to wait as long as I did to find help." "That's a yes?" Marcus asked. "That's a hell yes." Accepting the Bradley Foundation grant transformed the ranch into something neither Marcus nor Miguel had originally envisioned. The first major change was personnel. They hired Dr. Kevin Walsh as clinical director, Rachel Martinez as training coordinator, and James Thompson as operations manager. Each brought extensive experience in veteran services and program development. The physical expansion was equally dramatic. Construction began on a second bunkhouse, an expanded workshop facility, and a dedicated training center where future program directors would learn their methodology. The quiet ranch that had once sheltered a desperate young soldier was becoming a bustling hub of activity. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity," Marcus confided to Miguel one evening as they watched construction crews working under floodlights. "Remember when it was just you and me, trying to fix fence posts?" "I miss it too," Miguel admitted. But then, I get emails from Tommy about how well his kids are doing, or from Jennifer about her new job, and I remember why we're doing this. The challenge of maintaining quality while expanding proved more complex than anticipated. Each new staff member had to understand not just the technical aspects of the program, but its philosophy, the balance between structure and flexibility, the importance of authentic relationships, the difference between helping and enabling. Danger is institutionalization, Dr. Walsh warned during a staff training session. As soon as this feels like a typical treatment facility instead of a genuine community, we lose what makes it effective. Miguel found himself thrust into a teaching role he'd never anticipated. Potential program directors came to the ranch for 2-week intensive training sessions, learning everything from ranch operations to group therapy facilitation to crisis intervention. The hardest part to teach, Miguel told one group of trainees, is how to be vulnerable without losing authority. These veterans need to see that you understand their experience, but they also need to trust that you can guide them through their recovery. How do you balance those roles? Asked Sarah Kim, a former Marine captain who was planning to start a program in North Carolina. By being honest about your own ongoing recovery, Miguel replied. I still see Dr. Matthews monthly. I still have bad days. The difference is that I've learned to use those experiences to help others instead of being consumed by them. The success stories multiplied as their second and third cohorts completed the program. Marcus kept a wall of photos in his office graduates at job interviews, wedding photos, pictures of veterans with their children, updates from around the country as former participants built new lives. But it was a letter that arrived in March that reminded them both how far they'd traveled from that stormy night 2 years earlier. Marcus, Miguel called from the main house, his voice tight with emotion. You need to see this. The letter was from Emma Rodriguez, Miguel's daughter, now 8 years old. It was written in careful third-grade handwriting and included a drawing of a little girl and a man in military uniform. Dear Daddy, it read. Mommy says you are helping other soldiers like you used to be one. I am proud of you for helping people. Can I visit your ranch sometime? I want to see the horses. Love, Emma. Miguel sat heavily in his chair, the letter trembling in his hands. She wants to see me, Marcus. After all this time, she wants to see me. What did her mother say when you called? Emma's been asking questions about why I disappeared. And she decided it was time to tell her the truth, not all of it, but that I was sick and getting better. She's willing to let Emma visit. The visit was scheduled for a weekend. In April, when the ranch would be quieter, Miguel spent days preparing, alternating between excitement and terror about seeing his daughter after 2 years of separation. What if she doesn't remember me? He asked Marcus the night before Emma's arrival. What if I don't know how to talk to her anymore? Miguel, you've learned how to reach combat veterans dealing with severe trauma. I think you can handle a conversation with an 8-year-old. Emma arrived on a Saturday morning, small and shy, hiding behind her mother's legs until she spotted the horses in the paddock. Her fascination with the animals broke the ice, and within an hour she was feeding carrots to Thunder while Miguel told her stories about each horse's personality. This one's really old, Emma observed, stroking Thunder's neck. 24. Miguel confirmed. But he's still got a lot of wisdom to share. Like you, Daddy? The simple question hit Miguel like a physical blow. Here was his daughter, seeing him not as the broken man who'd disappeared from her life, but as someone with wisdom worth sharing. They spent the weekend doing simple things, feeding animals, walking trails, building a birdhouse in the workshop. Emma was fascinated by everything, asking endless questions about ranch life and why veterans came to stay there. Are they sad like you were? She asked during one of their walks. Miguel considered how to answer honestly without frightening her. Some of them are sad, yes. Some are angry or scared. But they come here to learn how to feel better, just like I did. And you help them? I try to. Just like Marcus helped me. Emma's visit became a monthly tradition, and her presence at the ranch had an unexpected impact on the program participants. Watching Miguel with his daughter showed them a different side of their mentor, not just the competent leader who guided their recovery, but a father rebuilding a relationship with his child. It gives them hope, Dr. Walsh observed. They see that recovery isn't just about managing symptoms. It's about reclaiming the relationships and roles that matter most. By the program's second anniversary, the transformation was complete. The Crawford Ranch had become exactly what Miguel had envisioned during those early planning sessions, a place where broken veterans could discover they weren't irreparably damaged, just temporarily lost. The statistics were impressive. 87% of graduates had maintained stable housing and employment 2 years post-program. Suicide attempts among participants had dropped to 0 during their time at the ranch and remained statistically insignificant after graduation. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real measure of success was in the letters, phone calls, and visits from former participants. Tommy Rodriguez had remarried and was expecting his 3rd child. Jennifer Walsh had completed her programming boot camp and was working for a tech company in Seattle while pursuing her bachelor's degree online. Robert Kim was running his own therapeutic writing program and had just gotten engaged to a fellow veteran he'd met at a conference. You know what? The most remarkable thing is, Marcus said during the anniversary celebration, looking out over a crowd that included staff, current participants, graduates, and their families. 2 years ago, none of this existed. It was just an idea born from desperation and hope. Miguel, now 31 and bearing little resemblance to the broken young man who'd collapsed on Marcus's doorstep, stood before the assembled crowd to give the keynote speech. People ask me all the time how this happened, he began. How does a program start with one desperate veteran and grow into something that's helped over 200 people reclaim their lives? The answer isn't complicated. It starts with one person deciding that someone else's pain matters enough to do something about it. He looked directly at Marcus, who was sitting in the front row with Emma on his lap. Marcus Crawford saved my life on a night when I wasn't sure I wanted it saved. But more than that, he showed me that my experience, all the pain and loss and guilt I was carrying, could be transformed into something useful for other people. That's what recovery really means. Not forgetting what happened to you, but learning to use it in service of something larger than yourself. As the celebration continued into the evening, Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah and how proud she would have been of what the ranch had become. The land she'd loved was serving a purpose worthy of her memory, providing sanctuary and hope to people who desperately needed both. But more than that, he was thinking about the unexpected gift Miguel had given him, not just the satisfaction of meaningful work, but the discovery that his own capacity for compassion was far greater than he'd ever imagined. In helping heal a broken soldier, he'd somehow healed parts of himself he hadn't even realized were damaged. The story could have ended there, with the successful program and the lives transformed and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. But neither Marcus nor Miguel could have predicted that their greatest challenge and their most unexpected triumph was still ahead of them. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 years after Miguel had first collapsed on Marcus's doorstep. Miguel was in the training center, teaching a group of prospective program directors about crisis intervention techniques, when Lisa Chun appeared in the doorway with an expression he'd never seen before, part excitement, part disbelief. "Miguel, you need to take this call," she said, holding out her phone. "It's the White House." The room full of trainees went completely silent. Miguel felt his heart rate spike as he took the phone. Stepping outside onto the porch overlooking the Montana landscape that had become his sanctuary. "This is Miguel Rodriguez." "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Patricia Williams, Deputy Director of the Office of Veterans Affairs. I'm calling on behalf of President Harrison's administration. The President would like to invite you and Mr. Crawford to..." Washington next month to receive the Presidential Citizens Medal for your work with veteran recovery programs. Miguel had to sit down on the porch steps. The Presidential Citizens Medal was the second highest civilian honor in the United States, typically reserved for people who had made extraordinary contributions to the nation or their fellow citizens. Are you sure you have the right people? Miguel managed, very sure. Your program has been studied by our policy team as a potential model for national implementation. The President has specifically requested to meet with you both to discuss how ranch-based therapy programs might be scaled to serve veterans nationwide. After the call ended, Miguel sat on the porch for 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Marcus found him there, staring out at the mountains with a look of stunned bewilderment. "White House?" Marcus asked, having heard the news. "From Lisa, Presidential Citizens Medal. They want us in Washington next month." Miguel shook his head. "Marcus, 3 years ago I was sleeping in my truck. Now the President of the United States wants to meet with me." "Now the President wants to meet with us," Marcus corrected. "And he's right to. Do you have any idea how many lives you've changed?" The invitation sparked a media frenzy that dwarfed anything they'd experienced before. National news networks sent crews to the ranch, conducting interviews with Miguel, Marcus, program participants, and graduates. The story of the broken soldier who became a national leader in veteran recovery captured public imagination in ways neither man had anticipated. "It's the American dream narrative," explained Jennifer Walsh, now a successful software engineer who'd flown in from Seattle to support Miguel during the media circus. "Trauma to triumph, individual initiative creating systematic change." People want to believe that kind of transformation is possible, but the attention also brought unexpected challenges. The ranch received hundreds of applications from veterans seeking admission, far more than they could accommodate, even with their expanded capacity. Protesters appeared outside the gates, not many, but enough to require security consultations, claiming that public attention was being lavished on special treatment for veterans while other groups struggled for resources. "The visibility is a double-edged sword," Dr. Walsh warned during an emergency staff meeting. "It brings opportunities, but it also makes us a target for criticism and unrealistic expectations." Miguel found himself struggling with the attention in ways that surprised him. The young man who'd learned to speak confidently about trauma recovery to small groups of professionals was now being asked to articulate his vision for national policy on television programs watched by millions. "I keep thinking about the veterans who won't get help because we can't scale fast enough," he told Dr. Matthews during one of their sessions. "Every day we spend doing interviews is a day we're not expanding the program. And every interview reaches someone who might not otherwise know help is available," she countered. "Your visibility gives hope to people who think recovery is impossible. That has value too." The trip to Washington was surreal. Miguel had been to the Capitol once before, during a brief military assignment, but returning as an honored guest felt like stepping into someone else's life. The ceremony itself was held in the Rose Garden, with President Harrison personally presenting the medals to Miguel and Marcus while Emma watched from the audience, wearing her best dress and beaming with pride. Miguel Rodriguez and Marcus Crawford represent the very best of American compassion and innovation, the President said during his remarks. Their program proves that healing happens not in isolation, but in community, and that the most effective solutions often come from people who have lived the problems they're trying to solve. During their private meeting with the President afterward, the conversation quickly turned to policy implications. "We're spending billions on veteran health care, but we're not getting the outcomes we need," President Harrison explained. "Traditional treatment models work for some veterans, but clearly not for all. What would it take to implement your approach on a national scale?" Miguel had prepared for this question, working with policy experts from the Bradley Foundation to co-develop a comprehensive proposal. The key factors are land, community integration, and properly trained staff, he explained. We can't just build facilities, we need partnerships, with rural communities willing to embrace veterans as neighbors and contributors, not just patients. And the cost? Significantly less than traditional residential treatment programs, Marcus answered. Our per-participant cost is about 60% of comparable VA facilities, and our outcomes are substantially better. The president leaned forward with interest. Why is that? Because we're not treating veterans like broken machines that need fixing, Miguel replied. We're treating them like human beings who need purpose, community, and hope. The ranch work isn't just therapy, it's a meaningful contribution to something larger than themselves. 3 weeks after returning from Washington, they received another call that would reshape their future once again. This time, it was from Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Rebecca Martinez. Miguel, the president has authorized a pilot program based on your model. We want to establish 10 ranch-based recovery centers over the next 2 years, with the Crawford Ranch serving as the training and coordination hub. Are you interested? The federal pilot program represented both an incredible opportunity and a fundamental challenge to everything they'd built. Government funding would allow them to help thousands of veterans instead of hundreds, but it would also bring federal oversight, bureaucratic requirements, and the constant pressure of political scrutiny. We'll need complete operational independence, Miguel negotiated during subsequent discussions. The moment this becomes a typical government program with standard procedures and bureaucratic protocols, it stops working. Agreed, Secretary Martinez replied. That's exactly why we want your organization to run it instead of traditional VA contractors. The next year was a whirlwind of activity. Miguel found himself traveling constantly, visiting potential sites for new programs, training government-selected program directors, and testifying before congressional committees about veteran recovery policy. The ranch continued operating, but much of the day-to-day management fell to Dr. Walsh and the expanded staff. I feel like I'm losing touch with the actual work, Miguel confided to Marcus during one of his brief returns to Montana. I'm spending more time in conference rooms than with veterans. That's the price of success, Marcus replied. But remember, every conference room meeting is reaching people who can create more programs like this one. You're not abandoning the work, you're multiplying it. The first federal ranch program opened in Texas 18 months later, followed quickly by facilities in Colorado, Virginia, and Oregon. Each was adapted to local conditions and communities, but all shared the core principles Miguel and Marcus had developed: meaningful work, peer support, professional therapy, and gradual reintegration into civilian life. The results are remarkable, reported Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the federal program's evaluation coordinator, during a briefing to congressional leadership. Completion rates are 89% compared to 62% for traditional residential programs. Post-program employment rates are 91% compared to 74% for conventional treatment. Most significantly, participants in ranch programs show sustained improvement in PTSD symptoms, depression, and overall life satisfaction. But the success metrics that mattered most to Miguel were more personal. Letters continued arriving from graduates, now numbering in the thousands, sharing updates about marriages, children, new careers, and lives rebuilt from the ground up. One letter particularly moved him. It was from David Chen, a former Army medic who'd graduated from the Virginia program. Miguel, it read, I wanted you to know that I've been accepted to medical school. 2 years ago, I couldn't even handle being around hospitals because of my PTSD. Now I'm going to become a doctor so I can help other veterans heal from both visible and invisible wounds. This never would have happened without the hope you and Marcus gave me that recovery was possible. Emma, now 11, had become a regular presence at the ranch during her monthly visits. She'd grown up watching veterans transform their lives. and her matter-of-fact acceptance of trauma and recovery had shaped her into a remarkably empathetic young person. "Daddy, are you famous now?" she asked during one of their walks around the property. "I guess some people know who I am," Miguel replied carefully. "But I'm still just your dad. I know that. But it's cool that you help so many people. My friends at school think it's really neat that my dad meets with the president. What do you think about it?" Emma considered the question seriously. "I think it's good that important people are listening to you. But I liked it better when you were here more often." The comment hit Miguel hard. His success in expanding the program had come at the cost of time with the daughter he'd worked so hard to reconnect with. It was a common trap for people in helping professions, becoming so focused on serving others that they neglected their own most important relationships. "You're right," he told her. "I need to figure out how to balance helping other veterans with being your dad." "Which one is more important to you?" "Both," Emma said pragmatically. "But being my dad is more important to me personally." That conversation led to Miguel's decision to step back from some of the travel and public speaking, delegating more responsibility to the expanded team of professionals they'd trained. He restructured his role to focus on program development and quality control while spending more time at the ranch and with Emma. "You know what I've learned?" he told Marcus during one of their evening conversations on the porch. "Success isn't just about reaching as many people as possible. It's about sustaining the work over time, and that requires taking care of yourself and the people who matter most." The 5th anniversary of the Crawford Ranch Veterans Program was marked by a celebration unlike any they'd held before. Veterans from all 10 federal programs gathered in Montana, along with their families, staff members, and supporters. The quiet ranch that had once sheltered a single desperate soldier was now the acknowledged birthplace of a movement that had transformed veteran care across the country. President Harrison attended via video link, announcing that the ranch program model would be expanded to include programs specifically designed for female veterans, veteran families, and veterans dealing with physical disabilities. Miguel Rodriguez showed us that the most effective healing happens when people with lived experience are empowered to help others facing similar challenges. The president said, "This program proves that recovery is possible, that community matters, and that every veteran deserves the chance to rebuild their life with dignity and purpose." As the celebration continued around them, Miguel and Marcus found themselves standing where they'd had their first real conversation 5 years earlier by the fence line where Miguel had shared his story of guilt and loss. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't answered the door that night?" Miguel asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember what Sarah always said about everything happening for a reason. Maybe you were sent here not just to save yourself, but to figure out how to save others. And maybe you were ready to help because losing Sarah taught you what healing looks like when it's done with love instead of just professional obligation." They stood in comfortable silence, two men who'd found in each other exactly what they'd needed at exactly the right moment. Around them, the sounds of celebration continued, veterans and their families sharing stories, children playing on the grass where Miguel had once collapsed in despair, staff members discussing plans for future expansion. But neither of them could have predicted that their most significant challenge was still ahead, a crisis that would test everything they'd built and force them to discover just how strong their foundation really was. The crisis began with what seemed like routine news. Miguel was in his office reviewing applications for the spring cohort when Dr. Walsh knocked on his door, his face grim with concern. "We need to talk," Kevin said, closing the door behind him. "I just got off the phone with Janet Reeves. There's been an incident at the Texas program." Miguel felt his stomach drop. "What kind of incident?" "A participant named Bradley Morrison had a severe PTSD episode during the group therapy session yesterday. He became violent, struck another veteran, and barricaded himself in his room for 6 hours before they could get him to agree to go to the hospital. The news hit Miguel like a physical blow. In 5 years of operation, they'd never had a violent incident at the Crawford Ranch. Their screening process was designed specifically to identify and redirect veterans who might pose a danger to themselves or others. Is everyone okay? The other veteran has a broken nose, but nothing serious. Morrison is in psychiatric hold at a VA hospital in San Antonio. But Miguel. Kevin paused, clearly struggling with what came next. There's more. Morrison had been drinking. Apparently, he'd been smuggling alcohol into the facility for weeks. Miguel sank into his chair. Substance abuse was explicitly prohibited in all their programs, not as punishment, but because it interfered with the therapeutic process and could trigger other participants' addictions. How did this happen? What about the supervision protocols? That's what we're trying to figure out. The Texas Program Director, Sarah Kim, is conducting a full investigation. But Miguel, this is going to be a problem for all of us. The media is already picking up the story. Within hours, the story had exploded across social media and news networks. Violence erupts at elite veteran program led the evening news on 3 major networks. The reports focused on the drama of the incident while largely ignoring the context of 5 years of successful outcomes for thousands of veterans. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Secretary Martinez said during an emergency conference call that evening. One incident can undermine years of positive results. Congress is already asking questions about oversight and whether we rushed the expansion too quickly. Miguel felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. Every veteran who had succeeded in their programs, every life that had been saved or rebuilt, suddenly felt overshadowed by this single moment of violence. What's the department's position? He asked. For now, we're conducting a full review of all ranch programs. No new admissions until we complete the investigation and implement any necessary policy changes. How long will that take? At least 3 months, possibly longer. After the call ended, Miguel sat alone in his office, staring out at the mountains that had once represented peace and possibility. Now they felt like barriers, cutting him off from the world he'd been trying to serve. Marcus found him there an hour later, still sitting in the dark. Beating yourself up isn't going to fix this, Marcus said gently, turning on the desk lamp. 27 applications on my desk from veterans who need help, Miguel replied without looking up. Now we can't help any of them because I failed to prevent one incident in a program I'm supposed to be overseeing. You can't oversee every moment of every day in every program, Miguel. That's not how leadership works. Then how does it work? Because right now, it feels like everything we've built is falling apart. Marcus pulled up a chair. Can I tell you something Sarah once said to me? She said that the measure of a person isn't whether they never fail, but whether they learn from failure and use it to do better next time. This isn't just my failure, Marcus. This affects thousands of veterans who need these programs. Which is exactly why we figure out what went wrong and fix it, instead of wallowing in guilt. The investigation revealed multiple system failures at the Texas program. Sarah Kim, despite her military background and training at the Crawford Ranch, had allowed protocols to become lax. Room inspections had become perfunctory, staff supervision had been reduced to save money, and warning signs about Morrison's deteriorating mental state had been ignored or misinterpreted. It's a classic case of success breeding complacency, Dr. Walsh explained during a video conference with all program directors. The Texas program had been running smoothly for 18 months. They started cutting corners because they thought they had everything figured out. But the deeper investigation revealed something more troubling. Morrison had been experiencing severe symptoms for weeks before the incident, but had been reluctant to report them because he feared being dismissed from the program. The pressure to succeed, combined with shame about his struggles, had led him to self-medicate with alcohol rather than seek help. We created a culture where failure felt unacceptable, Miguel realized during a painful staff meeting. Veterans were so grateful to be in the program that they were afraid to admit when they were struggling. That's a systemic issue we need to address across all programs, Dr. Matthews observed. We need to make it safe for participants to have setbacks without fearing consequences. The media coverage continued for weeks, with critics using the incident to question the entire concept of ranch-based therapy. Congressional hearings were scheduled, with Miguel called to testify about program oversight and safety protocols. 6 years ago, you were a broken veteran sleeping in your truck, pointed out Congressman William Hayes during a particularly hostile exchange. What qualifies you to oversee mental health programs for thousands of veterans? The question stung because it echoed Miguel's own doubts. What qualifies me, Congressman, is that I've been where these veterans are. I understand their pain, their shame, and their desperate need for hope. But you're right that one person can't oversee everything. That's why we need better systems and more resources, not fewer programs. How do we know this won't happen again? We don't, Miguel answered honestly. Recovery is messy and unpredictable. But the alternative, doing nothing, guarantees that more veterans will die by suicide, become homeless, or remain trapped in cycles of addiction and despair. One incident shouldn't overshadow 5 years of success stories. The hearing was brutal, but Miguel's honest testimony seemed to resonate with some committee members. Congressman Lisa Rodriguez, a veteran herself, asked pointed questions about what resources would be needed to improve oversight and prevent future incidents. If we're going to continue these programs, what changes are necessary? She asked. Miguel had prepared for this question extensively. First, mandatory monthly site visits by clinical supervisors. Second, enhanced training for program directors on identifying and managing crisis situations. Third, clear protocols for participants to report struggles without fear of program dismissal. And fourth, better integration with local emergency services and VA hospitals. What would that cost? About 15% more than current funding levels. But the alternative, returning to traditional treatment models with lower success rates, costs far more in terms of both money and human suffering. Behind the scenes, the veteran community rallied in ways that surprised everyone. Tommy Rodriguez organized a letter-writing campaign, with hundreds of program graduates sharing their stories with congressional representatives. Jennifer Walsh created a social media campaign highlighting success stories. Robert Kim testified at the hearing as a character witness for Miguel and the program model. Miguel Rodriguez saved my life, Robert told the committee. Not just by creating a program, but by showing me that recovery was possible. One incident doesn't erase the fact that thousands of veterans are alive today because of the hope he gave them. Emma, now 12, watched the hearings on television with quiet intensity. When Miguel returned home exhausted and defeated after his testimony, she was waiting for him on the porch. "Daddy, are you going to be okay?" "I don't know, sweetheart. A lot of people are angry about what happened in Texas. But it wasn't your fault, was it? You weren't even there." Sometimes leaders have to take responsibility, even when they weren't directly involved. That's part of the job. Emma considered this seriously, but you can't be everywhere at once. And you can't control what other people do, right? Out of the mouths of babes. Miguel realized his 12-year-old daughter had grasped something he'd been struggling with for months: the difference between responsibility and control. "You're absolutely right," he told her. "I can't control everything, but I can take responsibility for fixing what went wrong." The resolution came gradually rather than dramatically. The moratorium on new admissions was lifted after 4 months. With enhanced oversight protocols in place, Sarah Kim was replaced as director of the Texas program, though she remained involved as a supervisor trainee. Bradley Morrison, after receiving intensive treatment, wrote a letter taking full responsibility for his actions and apologizing to the veteran he'd injured. "I want everyone to know that my failure doesn't reflect the quality of the program," Morrison wrote in a statement released through his lawyer. "The ranch program gave me tools I needed for recovery. My mistake was not using them when I needed them most. More importantly, the crisis had exposed weaknesses in their system that needed addressing anyway. The enhanced protocols, while requiring more resources, ultimately made all the programs safer and more effective. In some ways, this incident was a blessing in disguise," Dr. Walsh observed 6 months later during their annual program review. "It forced us to confront complacency and improve systems we thought were working fine." "I'm not sure I'd call it a blessing," Miguel replied. "But I've learned that crisis can be a teacher if you're willing to listen to what it's telling you." The ranch programs not only survived the crisis, but emerged stronger. Congressional funding was increased to support the enhanced oversight protocols. 3 additional programs were approved for development. Most significantly, the incident had sparked important conversations about mental health, trauma, and the complexity of recovery that might not have happened otherwise. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Marcus said one evening as they walked the fence line where their journey had begun. "Not that we survived the crisis, but how we survived it. We didn't make excuses, we didn't blame others, and we didn't abandon our principles. We took responsibility and did better." "I keep thinking about Morrison," Miguel replied. "He's doing well now, got a job, reconnected with his family. But I wonder how many veterans saw the news coverage and decided not to seek help because they're afraid of being seen as dangerous. Some probably. But I also think about how many people learned that recovery isn't perfect, that setbacks happen, and that getting help is still worth the risk." The most unexpected outcome of the crisis was personal. Miguel's handling of the incident, his willingness to accept responsibility, his honest testimony, and his commitment to improvement rather than defensiveness had earned him respect even from former critics. "You've become a real leader," Emma told him during one of their weekend hikes. "Not the kind who just tells people what to do, but the kind who shows them how to handle hard things." "What do you mean?" "Well, when something bad happened, you didn't run away or blame other people. You figured out how to fix it. That's what leaders do, right?" Miguel realized his daughter was right. The crisis had tested everything he'd learned about leadership, responsibility, and resilience. More importantly, it had shown him that the qualities he'd developed through his own recovery, honesty, accountability, perseverance, were exactly what was needed to guide others through difficult times. "You know what I've learned, Em? Sometimes the worst things that happen to you end up teaching you the most important lessons. Like when you got hurt in the war and came to Marcus's ranch. Exactly like that. Sometimes what looks like an ending is really a beginning." As they reached the top of the hill overlooking the ranch, Miguel could see current participants working with cattle in the distance, staff members conducting training sessions, and the buildings that housed a program now serving veterans across the country. The crisis had tested their foundation, but it hadn't broken it. If anything, it had revealed just how solid that foundation really was. And it had prepared them for the extraordinary opportunity that was about to present itself, one that would take their work in directions neither Miguel nor Marcus had ever imagined possible. The extraordinary opportunity arrived 18 months after the crisis, in the form of an unexpected visitor who would forever change how Miguel understood the true impact of their work. It was a crisp morning in late fall when a black sedan pulled up to the ranch house, followed by 2 SUVs with government plates. Miguel was working with the current cohort on winterizing equipment when Lisa Chun approached him with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Miguel, you need to come to the main house immediately. There's someone here to see you, someone very important." The someone turned out to be General Patricia Richardson, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, accompanied by an aide and 2 security personnel. She was a woman in her late 50s with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. But when she saw Miguel, her formal demeanor softened into something approaching reverence. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, extending her hand. "I've been wanting to meet you for a very long time." "It's just Miguel now, ma'am, and the honor is mine," General Richardson smiled. "I know who you are now, Miguel. But I also knew who you were before." Kandahar Province, October 2019. Your unit was ambushed while conducting a patrol near Forward Operating Base Chapman. Miguel felt the familiar tightness in his chest that still came when someone mentioned that day. "Yes, ma'am." "That's correct. What you don't know is that I was the commanding general for that entire theater of operations. The after-action report from your unit's engagement crossed my desk personally." She paused, studying his face. "Miguel, do you remember the evacuation helicopter that extracted your wounded?" "Of course. It saved our lives. That helicopter was able to reach your position because of the coordinates you provided under heavy enemy fire, despite being wounded yourself. The pilot told me later that without your precise location data and tactical assessment, he never would have been able to navigate the terrain safely." Miguel felt confused. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand." General Richardson's voice grew quiet. "Miguel, that helicopter didn't just extract your wounded soldiers. There was a second mission that Night One classified until very recently. We had intelligence that a group of American contractors were being held captive in a compound 3 miles from your position. The Taliban were planning to execute them at dawn." The world seemed to stop around Miguel. Marcus, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped closer. "The helicopter that extracted your wounded was able to continue to the hostage location because the pilot was confident in the route you'd provided," General Richardson continued. "The rescue operation was successful. All 5 contractors were recovered alive." Miguel sank into the nearest chair. I never knew. It was classified. But those 5 men went home to their families because of the intelligence you provided, while your own friends were dying around you. Miguel, you didn't just save the soldiers in your unit that night. You saved 10 lives total." The revelation hit Miguel like a physical force. For 7 years, he'd carried the guilt of not being able to save his 4 fallen comrades. He'd never known that his actions that night had contributed to saving 5 other lives. "Why are you telling me this now?" he managed to ask. General Richardson smiled. "Because one of those contractors was my nephew, David Richardson. He's been following your work here for years. When the classification was lifted last month, he asked me to come here personally to thank you." She gestured to her aide, who handed her a folder. "But that's not the only reason I'm here. The Department of Defense has been studying your ranch program model extensively. We want to establish military transition ranches specifically for active duty service members dealing with combat stress before it develops into chronic PTSD." Miguel looked at Marcus, seeing his own amazement reflected in the older man's eyes. "You're talking about prevention rather than treatment," Miguel said slowly. "Exactly. Instead of waiting for soldiers to break down after they leave the service, we want to help them process trauma while they're still on active duty, using your community-based approach." The proposal was staggering in scope. The military wanted to establish 15 transition ranches where active duty personnel could spend 30 to 60 days processing combat experiences before returning to duty or civilian life. The programs would be voluntary but strongly encouraged for anyone who'd experienced significant combat trauma. "We're talking about potentially helping thousands of service members annually," General Richardson explained. "And we want you to design and oversee the entire program." Miguel felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. "General, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to design military policy." "Miguel, you've created the most successful veteran recovery program in the country. You've testified before Congress, overseen federal programs, and proven that your approach works. Most importantly, you understand both the military culture and the healing process from personal experience. Marcus spoke up for the first time. What would this mean for the existing programs? They would continue and expand, the aide answered. This would be a parallel system specifically for active duty personnel. Mr. Rodriguez would maintain oversight of the veteran programs while also developing the military initiative. That evening, after General Richardson and her team had departed, Miguel and Marcus sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed so much transformation. "Can you believe it?" Miguel asked. 7 years ago, I thought. My actions in Kandahar had only resulted in the deaths of my friends. Now I find out I helped save 5 other lives. Does it change how you feel about that day? Miguel considered the question carefully. It doesn't bring back Johnson, Martinez, Williams, or Chun. I'll always carry that loss. But it does change. The story from one of pure tragedy to something more complex, loss and rescue. Failure and success existing together. Kind of like your whole journey, Marcus observed. How do you mean? You came here broken, but that brokenness led to something that's helped thousands of people. Your worst moment contained the seeds of your greatest contribution. Emma arrived the next day for her weekend visit, now 13 and beginning to show signs of the thoughtful young woman she was becoming. When Miguel told her about General Richardson's visit and the new opportunity, she listened with the serious attention she'd learned to give to important conversations. "So you'll be helping soldiers before they get as hurt as you were?" she asked. "That's the idea. Prevention instead of just treatment." "That's really smart. It's like teaching people to swim before they fall in deep water instead of just rescuing them after they're drowning." Once again, his daughter had captured the essence of something complex with startling clarity. "Exactly right. But it means I'll be traveling more again, at least initially." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Will you still be my dad?" "Always. And I'll still live here at the ranch. But I might need to be away more often for meetings and training sessions." "I think you should do it," she said firmly. "If you can help people before they get hurt as bad as you were, that's really important." The decision to accept the military position was made easier by the knowledge that the ranch programs were now self-sustaining. Dr. Walsh had evolved into an exceptional clinical director. Lisa Chun was handling day-to-day operations with increasing independence, and Marcus remained the steady foundation that anchored everything. "I can't think of a better legacy for Sarah," Marcus said when Miguel formally accepted the position. "She always believed this place could help heal the world. Now it's going to help prevent some of that healing from being necessary in the first place." Miguel's new role as Director of Military Transition Programs launched 6 months later with a ceremony at the Pentagon attended by senior military leadership, veterans advocates, and families of service members. Emma sat in the front row, wearing a dress she'd picked out specifically for the occasion and beaming with pride as her father was sworn into his new position. "Miguel Rodriguez embodies the best of American resilience," said Secretary of Defense Robert Chun during his introduction. "His journey from wounded warrior to national leader proves that our greatest assets in caring for service members are often those who have walked the same difficult path." In his acceptance speech, Miguel reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought him to this moment. 7 years ago, I was lost on a dark road in Montana, convinced that my life had no purpose and my pain had no meaning. Marcus Crawford opened his door to a stranger and showed me that healing happens not in isolation, but in community. Today, we're expanding that community to include active duty service members who shouldn't have to wait until they're broken to receive the support they need. He looked out at the audience, seeing faces that represented thousands of families affected by military service. This program exists because one man decided that another person's pain mattered enough to take action. Every service member we help through these transition ranches will be a testament to the ripple effects of compassion, how one act of kindness can eventually touch thousands of lives. As the ceremony concluded and Miguel accepted congratulations from military leaders and politicians, he thought about the remarkable chain of events that had brought him to this point. A broken-down truck on a Montana road had led to personal healing, which had led to a revolutionary program, which had led to national recognition, which had now led to the opportunity to prevent the kind of suffering he'd endured. But the moment that mattered most came later that evening, when Emma hugged him goodnight at their hotel. "I'm really proud of you, Daddy," she said. "Not because you're famous or important, but because you help people and you keep being my dad no matter what. You know what I've learned, Em? The most important job anyone can have is being present. For the people who need them, everything else is just details." 3 years later, Miguel stood once again on the porch of the Crawford Ranch, now home to both the original Veteran Recovery Program and the headquarters for military transition programs across the country. The ranch had evolved into something none of them had originally envisioned, a place where healing happened. Leaders were trained, and the next generation of service members learned resilience before they needed to recover from trauma. Marcus, now 73 but still actively involved in daily operations, joined him for their evening ritual of checking on the animals and reviewing the day's progress. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked as they watched the current cohort of veterans working together to repair a fence that would be strong enough to last another generation. Miguel considered the question seriously. "About which part?" "Any of it. The journey, the pain, the responsibility, the recognition." "No regrets," Miguel said finally. "Even the worst parts led to something meaningful. Even the mistakes taught us something important." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared on the porch, now 16 and spending her summer working as a counselor aide with the youth program they'd established for children of veterans. "You two look very serious," she observed, settling into the swing Sarah had loved. "Just thinking about how far we've all come," Miguel replied. "And how far we still have to go," Marcus added. Emma smiled. "That's the thing about good work, isn't it? It's never really finished. There's always more healing to do, more people to help, more ways to make things better." Miguel looked at his daughter wise beyond her years, compassionate without being naive, strong enough to face difficult truths, and realized that perhaps the most important thing he'd accomplished wasn't the programs or the recognition or the thousands of lives touched. Perhaps it was simply being present for this remarkable young person who was growing up to believe that broken things could be healed and that everyone deserved the chance to find their way home. The injured soldier Marcus had sheltered had indeed returned to repay him, but not in the way either man could have imagined. Miguel's gratitude had taken the form of transforming his own healing into a gift for thousands of others, proving that sometimes the most powerful way to thank someone for saving your life is to dedicate that life to saving others. And in the end, that was exactly the kind of unexpected repayment that would have made Sarah Crawford proud. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.